The billionaire grandmother's unexpected emotional reaction to the necklace revealed a hidden past connection that no one in the room could have anticipated. For years she had been known as a woman of immense wealth, power, and influence. Someone whose name carried weight in society, whose presence commanded respect, and whose demeanor rarely cracked to show vulnerability. Yet in that instant, when her eyes locked onto the delicate piece of jewelry hanging around the young black girl's neck, something inside her shifted, almost as if time had folded back on itself and she was no longer the formidable woman everyone admired from a distance, but a human being staring at a piece of her own buried history. The necklace wasn't just a necklace to her. It was a key that unlocked a floodgate of memories she had kept suppressed for decades. Memories of another time and another person whose life had been intertwined with hers in ways few could understand. She had lived her life carefully curating her image, ensuring that the softer, more painful chapters of her youth remained hidden from the world. But the sight of that necklace tore away the carefully built walls she had constructed around her heart. The girl wearing the necklace had no idea of the storm she had just unleashed in the grandmother's mind. To her, it was an heirloom, something she had received from her own family, passed down lovingly through generations, a symbol of strength and endurance carried by the women before her. It wasn't expensive by today's standards. Not a piece one would expect to impress someone who could buy the world's most luxurious diamonds with ease. But its significance was far deeper. The grandmother's eyes welled up with tears because that necklace was once familiar to her, tied to someone she had loved, someone who had mattered more than anyone ever knew. It was not just an object but a reminder of promises made, moments shared, and the ache of separation that had haunted her even through her rise to fortune. The metal, worn, yet strong, the pattern etched into its surface, the way it glistened faintly in the light, all of it mirrored a fragment of her past she thought she would never encounter again. As her fingers trembled, reaching instinctively toward her lips as if to steady herself, she could see herself years ago in the reflection of that necklace. She was young then, far removed from the privileges and riches she would later accumulate, just a girl with dreams, hopes, and a connection that crossed boundaries others frowned upon. That necklace had belonged to someone close, someone whose absence had left a scar that success could never erase. Wealth had given her many things: comfort, status, security, but it had also demanded sacrifices. Demanded that she bury parts of her heart under layers of coldness and detachment. Yet here it was, resurfacing before her eyes in the most unexpected of ways. Not in the hands of an old friend, not in the depths of a drawer she had forgotten to empty, but around the neck of a girl who carried herself with innocence and pride, unaware of the story she was wearing. The grandmother's tears betrayed the truth that money could not shield her from her own humanity. Each drop that slid down her face was tied to memories of laughter once shared, of whispered conversations in quiet corners, of a bond that had been severed by forces greater than the two people who held it. She could almost hear the echoes of voices long gone, voices that had reminded her of love that was pure, yet condemned by the society they lived in. The necklace was more than jewelry, it was a relic of that defiance, a quiet rebellion against a world that had tried to separate them, and now, years later, fate had placed it before her again. This time around, the neck of a girl whose very presence challenged the structures of wealth and class the grandmother had spent her life entrenched in. The room grew quiet as those around her noticed the change in her demeanor. They had always known her to be composed, almost untouchable, but now they watched as she struggled with something raw and real. The hug that followed was instinctive, born out of a sudden need to bridge the gap between past and present, to reach out and connect with what she thought was lost forever. It wasn't just about the girl in front of her, but about the generations that linked them, about the resilience and continuity represented in that small chain of metal. The embrace became a way of saying everything words could not, the apologies never spoken, the gratitude never expressed, the longing never quenched. The hidden past connection was no longer hidden, at least not to her heart. She realized that the universe had a way of returning what mattered, even if only in fragments. Her wealth, her status, her reputation all seemed insignificant, compared to the overwhelming sense of belonging and recognition she felt in that moment. For so long she had thought herself alone in carrying the memory, but now she knew it lived on in another form, cherished and worn proudly by someone who might never know the full weight of its story. The necklace had crossed not only time but generations, finding its way back to her through unexpected hands, reminding her that love and memory are forces far greater than wealth or circumstance. The embrace, the tears, the trembling voice, all of it stemmed from the revelation that the girl was not a stranger to her soul but a continuation of something she once held dear. The necklace had brought to light a bond that transcended race, status, and time, a bond that had been silenced but never broken. And as the grandmother held the girl close, she realized that some connections, no matter how deeply buried, are destined to return when least expected. The necklace symbolized a powerful memory that bridged generational and cultural gaps, carrying within it the weight of stories untold, sacrifices endured, and legacies preserved. Jewelry often holds sentimental value, but this piece was far more than just an accessory. It was a living testament to history, resilience, and the unspoken threads that link one person's life to another's across time. When the billionaire grandmother's eyes fell upon it, what she saw was not simply metal and design, but a reflection of the past colliding with the present in a way that felt almost spiritual. To her, the necklace was a reminder of a time when relationships were not governed by wealth or societal status, but by raw human connection. To the young girl wearing it, it was a piece of family heritage, something that made her feel close to her ancestors and reminded her of the strength and dignity passed down through generations. Neither fully understood the meaning it held for the other until that moment, and it was in this silent recognition that the necklace became more than an heirloom. It became a bridge between two worlds. For the grandmother, who had lived a life at the highest levels of privilege, there had always been an invisible line separating her from those who did not share her status. It was not always intentional, but wealth creates distance, and she had grown accustomed to viewing life from a place where struggles were often abstract concepts rather than lived experiences. Yet this necklace pierced through that divide, reminding her of a time when she had been close to someone whose life was shaped by hardship, resilience, and a culture that thrived despite oppression. She remembered the days when she had witnessed strength in its purest form, not in boardrooms or investments, but in the quiet perseverance of those who carried the weight of inequality on their shoulders with grace. That necklace had once belonged to a woman whose spirit was unbreakable, a woman who had shown her that dignity could exist even in the face of scorn, that beauty could be found in simplicity, and that love did not recognize the divisions society sought to enforce. For the girl, the necklace was tied to bedtime stories told by her mother and grandmother, stories about women who had endured and overcome, women who had carried their families forward when the world tried to hold them back. It was a piece of her identity, a daily reminder that she was part of a lineage that refused to be erased. To her, it symbolized pride, belonging, and continuity, a constant anchor in a world that often questioned her worth. She wore it not for fashion, but for meaning, to keep alive the voices of the women who came before her. And when she noticed the older woman staring at it with such intensity, she could not immediately understand why something so personal to her family could evoke such raw emotion in a stranger. Yet in that exchange, she realized that the necklace's story was larger than her own family. It was a shared story, one that had rippled outward and touched lives beyond what she could imagine. The cultural gap between them, one born of race, class, and life experience, began to narrow in that instant. What had once seemed like two separate worlds suddenly overlapped because of this small piece of jewelry. The grandmother, who had always been seen as untouchable, was suddenly vulnerable, and the girl, who had always thought of her heirloom as something contained within her family, discovered that it carried echoes of others as well. The necklace had transcended material boundaries and become a vessel for memory, a symbol that connected not just individuals, but entire communities. Its presence reminded them both that human history is not a series of isolated stories, but an interwoven tapestry where lives intersect in unexpected ways. The design of the necklace itself, though simple, held symbolism that spoke across cultures. Its patterns had been carved by hands that understood the importance of preserving meaning in art. Its wear and tear testified to the lives it had witnessed. It was not extravagant, not the kind of piece one would see displayed in a jeweler's window in a wealthy district, but it had authenticity that no diamond or gemstone could replicate. It was a survivor, much like the people whose lives it represented, and as the grandmother studied it, she realized how much of herself she had buried in the name of survival too. How many moments of vulnerability she had locked away to maintain her position in a world that demanded strength at all costs. The necklace reminded her that she, too, had been shaped by a story of endurance. Even if her journey had unfolded differently, the generational bridge became even clearer as the grandmother reflected on the gap between her own life and the girl's. One stood at the end of her journey, with years of success and regret behind her, while the other stood at the beginning, with hope, energy, and the weight of expectations ahead. Yet both were linked by this object. Both were carriers of history in their own way. The grandmother carried memories of a lost relationship, while the girl carried the legacy of her ancestors, and the necklace bound those two narratives into a single thread. In that moment, the barriers of age, wealth, and culture melted away, replaced by a recognition that they were both part of something bigger, something that spanned across decades and generations. The symbolism of the necklace was not confined to personal stories. Either it spoke to the broader truth of how objects can become repositories of collective memory. It illustrated how cultural heritage can survive even when voices are silenced, how the material can hold on to the immaterial, and how symbols can bridge divides that seem insurmountable. The grandmother saw in it the universality of human connection, the reminder that even in a life dominated by wealth and luxury, what truly matters are the bonds that defy explanation. The girl saw in it a validation of her family's sacrifices, a recognition that her heritage carried weight beyond her own household. Together, they discovered that the necklace was not just a link between them, but a reminder of the shared human experience, where love, memory, and resilience weave together regardless of status or background. The cultural and generational gaps between them were not erased, but they were illuminated differently through the necklace. It became a mirror reflecting their differences while also showing their shared humanity. The grandmother, moved by the sight of something so familiar, realized that the necklace was a bridge she had been searching for without knowing it. The girl, surprised by the depth of reaction it inspired, realized that her inheritance was more powerful than she ever thought. In that moment, what separated them was overshadowed by what united them, and the necklace stood as a testament to the fact that memory, legacy, and human connection have the power to transcend the divisions of time, wealth, and culture. The embrace highlighted themes of reconciliation, shared humanity, and the breaking of social barriers in a way that words could never fully capture. For so long, the billionaire grandmother had lived in a world defined by boundaries of wealth, race, reputation, and power. Every handshake, every glance, every carefully measured smile was dictated by those invisible lines. But when she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the young girl with the necklace, all of those walls dissolved in an instant. It was not a gesture born of obligation or appearances, but one born of pure instinct. An instinct to connect, to acknowledge something bigger than herself. In that moment, she was not a billionaire, and the girl was not an ordinary teenager from a family far removed from riches. There were simply two souls colliding in a shared truth that transcended all the divisions the world tries to enforce. The hug carried a weight that went beyond the individuals involved. For the grandmother, it was an act of reconciliation with her own past. The sight of the necklace had opened wounds she had kept hidden, memories of relationships lost, of bonds broken by forces outside her control, and by embracing the girl, she was silently apologizing for everything that had gone unsaid. It was as though she was hugging not only the girl in front of her but also the person from her past who had once worn that necklace, the person whose absence had shaped her in ways she had never admitted. The hug became a bridge to the past, a physical manifestation of all the words she had never spoken, and in doing so, it brought her a sense of release that she had not realized she was searching for. For the girl, the embrace was a moment of unexpected affirmation. She had never imagined that something as simple as the necklace she wore would evoke such a reaction from someone so far removed from her life. She did not yet fully understand the depth of the grandmother's tears. But in that hug, she felt acknowledged, seen, and valued in a way that went beyond status or background. The warmth in the grandmother's trembling arms told her that her heritage carried weight, that the stories she had grown up with, the struggles of her ancestors, and the significance of the necklace were not invisible to the world. For a young black girl often navigating a society that, too, easily dismisses or diminishes her worth, this embrace was a quiet but powerful validation that her identity mattered, that her family's legacy was worthy of reverence even from someone at the pinnacle of wealth and influence. The hug also symbolized the breaking of social barriers that for generations had kept people apart. The grandmother, shaped by a world of exclusivity, and the girl, raised in a lineage of endurance and struggle, represented two sides of society that rarely met on equal terms. Yet in that embrace, the distance collapsed. It was a radical act, even if unintended, because it defied the expectations of those who had always assumed the grandmother's life was untouchable. To the onlookers, it was shocking to see such vulnerability from someone who had built her reputation on strength and reserve. But the deeper truth was that the hug shattered the illusion of separation. It showed that no matter how different two lives may seem on the surface, at the core there is a shared humanity that binds us all. The embrace revealed the grandmother's humanity in its rawest form. She had been perceived as cold, calculated, and untouchable, but in that moment, she was simply a woman overwhelmed by memory and connection. Her tears soaked into the girl's shoulder, a public display of vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the life she had lived. It was not just about sentimentality, but about a recognition that her wealth had never insulated her from the power of love, loss, and memory. This realization softened the space around her, making her appear not as an icon of wealth, but as a grandmother who, like any grandmother, longed for connection, healing, and continuity. The hug also carried implications for the future. It was not only a reconciliation with the past, but also a seed planted for what could come next. For the girl, it meant inheriting more than just a necklace. It meant inheriting a bond that tied her to stories outside her own family. Stories that now intertwined with someone she had never expected to be part of her journey. For the grandmother, it meant opening herself to a connection she thought had been lost forever. Acknowledging that love and memory live on through the generations, the embrace became a promise, unspoken yet powerful, that the past could be honored and the future could be different if walls were broken and humanity was allowed to take precedence over status and fear. On a symbolic level, the hug was a moment of healing not just for two individuals, but for the divisions their lives represented. It spoke to the possibility of reconciliation between wealth and poverty, between privilege and struggle, between races historically separated by systemic barriers. It reminded everyone who witnessed it that gestures, when sincere, can carry the weight of revolutions. No speech, no grand announcement, no show of wealth could have conveyed the message that one heartfelt embrace did, that love and recognition are more powerful than the structures that keep people apart. The girl, in her innocence, might not have fully grasped the enormity of what had just taken place, but she felt the sincerity in the arms wrapped tightly around her. She could sense that this was not pity or charity, but something deeper, something rooted in genuine recognition. The grandmother, for her part, did not care about appearances in that moment. She did not care about the whispers that might follow, about the headlines that might reduce the moment to gossip. All she cared about was holding on, as if letting go would mean losing a chance to reconcile with everything she had. Buried for so long, the embrace lasted only a short while in real time. But for both of them, it stretched into eternity. It was heavy with meaning, with history, with pain and healing intertwined. And when it finally ended, nothing about the world around them had visibly changed. But everything between them had. The hug had written a new chapter in their stories, one that neither of them could have predicted, but both of them needed. It had proven that reconciliation does not always come through grand gestures or carefully planned conversations, but sometimes through the simplest act of reaching out, of holding someone close, of letting barriers fall away long enough for two hearts to beat together in recognition of a shared truth. When that hug, reconciliation was no longer an abstract concept, but a living, breathing reality. Shared humanity was no longer a lofty idea, but something felt in the warmth of touch and the flow of tears. And the breaking of social barriers was no longer theoretical, but embodied in the sight of a billionaire grandmother and a young black girl, holding each other as if they had always been part of the same story.